Welcome to Working Dogs and Whiskey. Join Shaun White and Jonathan Moses as they pour a glass and dive into insightful and fun conversations about dogs in all their incredible roles. So grab your favorite drink and let's raise a glass to great stories, laughs, and a whole lot of dog talk.
Welcome back to another episode of Working Dogs and Whiskey. I'm Shaun White, and I'm sitting here with my friend, co-host Jonathan Moses. And for this episode, we did something a little bit different. And instead of hearing us to just talk back and forth, we were actually featured on another podcast. And so we're going to talk a little bit about personal protection dogs. But before we go into that, John, you want to introduce who our host was?
Absolutely. So our host was Aaron Haire. He's got a great podcast on Spotify called Doc Wit A Glock. Aaron's an actual doctor, but he also teaches personal protection, CWP classes, and he instructs a lot of people on personal firearms and how to keep themselves safe. So he invited myself and Sean to be on the podcast to go over protection dogs, kind of their role, what people should look for, kind of some just myths and things to watch out for as well if you're in the market for one. Great conversation, good guy, new father, and congrats to him.
All right, and without further ado, here's the episode.
What is up, everybody? This is your main man, Doc, aka Doc Wit A Glock, and I'm here back after a long hiatus, man. Like, I've been away from podcasting since the end of last year, really, and for good reason. We'll talk about, had my first child, so I'm going to make sure to pick these guys' brains, so the guys who I brought on the show, their brains and stuff, if they happen to be fathers, because I'll take any advice I can get. But guys, I have a special treat for you today. We're going to be talking with Shaun White and Jonathan Moses. They are professional dog trainers, and then also they run a very cool podcast, which is on Spotify, that I've become a recent fan of, which is called Working Dogs and Whiskey. So guys, really how you doing, man? How's things in life going?
It's going good, man. It's been busy, that's for sure. Finishing up the academy, going through, starting a new job, working for the police department. Like you said, kids are always a handful. That doesn't stop. After the newborn phase, they're always a handful. Other than that, it's going pretty good. Dogs are doing good too.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much in the same boat. Things are going pretty well. Just taking life one day at a time, really, honestly. Dogs are doing well, and it's cool to be on somebody else's podcast. It's a little different. I know we do one. I'm an introvert, so forgive the nervousness, but I appreciate the invite, man, and congrats on fatherhood. It's a better excuse to be away than what John and I have.
Man. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned like introvert, because like when I listen to podcast episodes and hear you speak, it doesn't come across like what magic you're doing to hype yourself up and pump yourself up before you start working.
Yeah.
That's called whiskey.
Well, since everybody, whiskey definitely will help to take the nerves away. And since you brought it up, I really wanted to let's go ahead and dive into that. Now, Sean, I heard that you tried the Uncle Nearest.
Yeah, I'm a good fan. Actually, I have a old empty bottle right here with me, Uncle Nearest. To be honest, it was by John. We were just doing some research on different types of whiskey, trying to expand out. I was actually more fascinated about the story behind Uncle Nearest and everything, and the production and how it came to be. Yeah. And that's really what brought me into it.
Yeah, I think that like it was just when I was thinking of what can I get these guys, the fellow Black podcasters. We just got out of the month of June, celebrating Juneteenth and everything. Like it was no other thing that I could think of that would be best fitting for you all than to give a gift that's celebrating Black history. Keeping that history and legacy that we carry alive.
I think that's what gets me on a bottle of whiskey a lot of times. Like I'll go through and like I'm no whiskey connoisseur by any means, even with the podcast name. But I'll go through and I'll start picking up bottles and just reading the story behind it, and that's what will sell me on a good bottle. And I actually really enjoy this one as I was looking into it.
For the listeners that don't know kind of the history of Uncle Nearest, the guy's name was Nathan Nearest Green. He was in Lincoln County, Tennessee, he was an enslaved person, and he worked for the Dan Call distillery there in Lincoln County, Tennessee, and became, one of the best whiskey distiller there in the county. And one of the things that made the whiskey he produced different from all the others in Tennessee was really a process of coal, I think maple coal filtering the whiskey to mellow the whiskey, which was actually a technique that was brought in from West Africans to filter water. So it's just a super cool story. And then even to see, after the emancipation of blacks, Call sold his distillery to Jack Daniels, and Nathan Mears Green is responsible for teaching Jack Daniels how to make whiskey, being the first Black distiller to become a master distiller in the United States. I mean, just dope history, man. Just dope.
Definitely cool.
So you guys, if you're out there, you're looking for a new whiskey to try, definitely give Uncle Nearest a try. You won't be disappointed. Now back to you guys here. How long have y'all been in the field of just dog training? Tell me kind of your origin story of dog training and your careers.
I knew.
Sean, I'll let you start.
So for me, I got into dog training by way of the military. I started in 2012, started volunteering on my off time with the canine section at my first installation in Japan. And from there, I mean, honestly, my main attraction was the autonomy with working with dogs. I didn't have to work with other people. It's kind of just me and the dog, and that was how it was conveyed to me. And so I was like, yeah, that's right up my alley. I like the independence and just to be able to kind of do my own thing and make my own path. That later turned into we'll call it a initiation, if you will. So it was constantly either spraying dog feces or getting bit, the guy being in the suit and all that good stuff. And then you earn your keep. And eventually that landed me into the canine field. And then from there, I was just able to progress and was very fortunate in my career to do a lot of training with dogs. And then I think the peak of my career started when I was in Lackland as a trainer for the DoD. So basically where the dogs go to boot camp, essentially, and they get trained and then pushed out to the various installation. And then from there, around 2022 is when I met Jon, and that's when I really started extensively working with dogs outside of the military frame, doing just different things from service projects, lease dogs, personal protection dogs, and some other capacities of dog training, along with the traditional pet dog or family dog training. And that's pretty much, how I got my start and where I'm at. I'm still active duty, so I still work with dogs in the military and things like that. Jon?
I want to circle back to something that you said earlier. You mean to tell me there's a hazing process to become a dog trainer in the military? Because does everybody have to be the bitee before they're
yeah, we try to refrain from hazing, but no, it really wasn't. There was a cool group of guys. I knew them. It was kind of the thing back then. It's not prevalent at all. They've changed the whole system where they actually get selected from MP school. So basically, fresh out of MP school, they go straight into handler scores. And from what I understand of it, their selection period is they write basically almost a resume, and then if they meet the requirements, and then they get reviewed by a board, and then that's how they get put into the program currently.
Oh, the last question, and then I'm going to go bounce over to Jonathan real quick because I want to hear his story. What is it like the first day you're in that suit and you see that first missile launched at you? Like, what is the
for me, it's weird because I told Jon that I still have a mild fear of dogs, just based off of past experiences when I was little. So for me, it was a lot more nerve wracking. To be honest, I think I'm pretty sure I closed my eyes and just wherever the dog landed was where, it's kind of like going on a roller coaster, man. You get to the peak of it and you're about to go down. You take a quick glimpse and then you just pray that everything else goes right. And then you worry about the rest later on. The only thing I can tell you is I was just praying that I didn't, we call it jamming the dog, or basically you want to funnel the dog and make sure that all the inertia and all that good stuff is placed. And that's all I was praying for. And then after that, you just feel the pain, and you just go for it. Yeah, pretty much.
Hold on for the ride. Jonathan, man, what about you, man? Tell us about kind of your story.
Kind of a different path. It's funny because me and Sean kind of worked opposites in the way we ended up with dogs and how we got into it. For me, I was always into dogs. Started with pet dogs. was going out, learning how to train dogs. From the time I was a little kid, I had my first Jack Russell, would go to some classes on the weekends. Long story short, I ended up getting my first working dog, which was a Canine Corso, an Italian Mastiff. Got a job at Petco because they saw me in there training the dog, and they pretty much gave me and my buddy free reins to use any tools we wanted because they're a purely positive philosophy kind of training as a company, and we weren't about that. It doesn't hold up well. So they said, hey, however you get the dogs trained, you can be a balanced trainer. We don't care. From that, I met another guy about half an hour to 45 minutes away from me. He introduced me to bite dogs, getting in the suit, and what we call bite sports. There's different competitions people go around and compete in, obedience, sometimes tracking, and a protection phase. And you get scored on how well you do, your control, your power, that kind of thing. So I did that for a while. A long story short, ended up opening up a company in Beaufort, South Carolina for a couple years. Is where I met Sean. Again, we were just hitting the pet dogs really hard. Started traveling, doing some more police dog stuff at that point. I did some police stuff prior to that. But it just started really taking off at that point, and me and Sean started collaborating on a lot more things. And then fast forward to present day where I got out of that company. Now I'm with the sheriff's department and doing some training with them, going the canine route. I figured it was the only thing I hadn't done was be a canine handler. Gotten to speak with them, train them. So now I get to see that firsthand.
Yeah, man. I remember the first time I met you. You come out to the range out in Darlington. You were there with Gage Godwin. Has he been successful yet in getting you bit by the USPSA competition bug?
He called me last night. I'm going to go out to a competition. I want to give it a go. I've been going out and shooting with him. We shot almost every weekend we got back from the academy. And trying to do at least twice a month since we've been back. But I'm going to give it a go. I don't think I'm going to do very well, but it'll be good training.
Well, yeah, man. I'll tell you, I think he basically kidnaps everybody he meets as a shooter, and tells them yeah, you're coming to shoot competition with me, because he literally showed up at my house. I jumped in his vehicle, went to a match up in Raleigh, damn near got DQ'd. Did he tell you the story about how I almost got DQ'd at my first match?
No.
It was even before the match started. I was shooting my Glock 45, which is one of my carry guns, and I had it holstered, but when we got out the truck, it was unloaded. So it was unloaded and holstered, and we're pulling up to the safe table. Gage has all his gear he's put on the table, and literally I'm like steps behind him, like right behind the little safe zone and stuff. So I pull my unloaded holstered gun off of my belt and to stick it on the table. Some dude just pops up out of nowhere. It's like, oh no, you can't do that. That's you're DQ'd. And Gage was literally like, yo, it's his first match. So the day got started great for me.
Yeah, he's told me about some of those. They're pretty strict on the rules. He's already been telling me like, hey, make sure when you run and turn, don't break the 180. He's been prepping me, like he's slowly initiating me into it. But it's funny because while we were at the academy, he didn't want to talk to anybody about shooting.
Yeah, he talked to me about that. He was like, he didn't want to come off as the arrogant guy because he's in the shooting world.
Yeah, but it was funny though. You can't shoot for the title. They have like a marksman award that they go out. It's a 1 per class. And you have to shoot a perfect score, and you can't do it with a red dot, which our department issues us. And everybody thinks you're cheating if you're using a red dot anyway. Yeah. He turned the red dot off, had no iron sights, and he completely indexed all the way out to 25 yards. So he just knew how to hold the gun properly and what it felt like to know that he was on target. And he shot blind out to 25 yards and shot perfect. The one director out there, he was pissed. He couldn't believe it. He kept checking and looking. He's like, there's no way you're doing that.
And so I bet they do hate when a student comes up and kind of shows out.
Yeah. Yeah, it was not received well. We thought it was hilarious, but
man, that sounds funny, man. What some of my listeners want to hear about in terms of just some other random hodgepodge is what guns and gear you guys running? Like, what's popular with you nowadays?
So for work, I just carry a Glock 45 with a Leopold red dot.
Okay.
And then I've got a TLR 7 light on it. That's pretty much my work setup. And then personally, I just carry a G4.
All right. What about you, Sean? When you're not carrying for work purposes, duty purposes, what would be,
So I'll be perfectly honest with you, man. I'm not as deep into guns as most Marines are. Yeah, I mean, I like to shoot and go out, but I don't carry an arsenal right now. I just have I think I still have just a Smith and Wesson. 9 mil. Yeah, nothing crazy.
Okay. Hey man, it's nothing wrong with Smith and Wesson. I think that was like Smith and Wesson T was one of my earlier
No,
home
that's what I
guns,
have
and
at
it's still running
MP
reliable.
show.
So it's nothing. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Well, let's dive into kind of what it is that you guys do, and I just really want y'all to nerd out because I listen to y'all podcasts, and I really want the listeners to subscribe first of all to the whiskey Working Dogs and Whiskey podcast because I think it's phenomenal. I think it's really cool information that we normally don't get. But what is one of your core memories or experiences with a dog that you say that would led to your passion of what you do today?
I think if I'm thinking the same way as John, we're probably going through a host of different dogs and situations. I know for me, probably my third working dog that I had, his name was Xerxes. And I'll tell a small story. I didn't want to, when I was leaving Japan, going to my second duty station, I wanted to go back East Coast because that's where I was from, South Carolina. I wanted to get back kind of closer to home, that type of thing. Of course, natural with the military, they were like, just go to California instead. That's as close as we can get you. So I was a little upset about that. So I'm trying to figure out information about this kennel, and this is 2014. I'm like, all right, let me see what I'm getting into. And I look and I go to their canine section, and it's the first dog that comes up, and he probably still comes up, is this Belgian Tervuren, which is a super hairy dog and all that stuff. And I thought it was the ugliest dog. Thought he was uglier than Sen. And I was like, dude, I don't want anything to do with him. And I show up, lo and behold, that's my dog. And but the thing that kind of stuck out to me about Xerxes is he was a dog that, I mean, he'd been there for probably almost upwards to 11 years actively working and did multiple deployments to Iraq and all that. And he just had these issues that just were inherent with him. He was a complete asshole. He would bite people and randomly, and he wouldn't release on command, those type of issues. I resolved them the best I could at that time. But going forward, just like any other trainer, you learn stuff, you understand stuff a little bit better, and you understand some of the foundational work and things that you could have did better. And that's one of the dogs that will always stick out to me that, like, I wish if I could go back in time, that would be one of the first dogs that I would go back and work with. So that's really what prompted me to every dog that I meet. I really want to do my best to understand, not just surface level, but like really get to know them and understand how we can make good correlations in the training.
I mean, that's really pretty deep that the dog that you didn't want ended up actually being the dog that taught you the most. That's cool, man. What about you, Jonathan, man? Any memory that was core to you that kind of stuck out to you, either a dog or childhood memory, anything like that?
So I think mine kind of came from like a point of defiance almost. Like as a kid, we moved around a lot. And I could never have a dog. I owned almost everything else you can think of. I had reptiles, piranhas, alligators. Never owned a dog. And I just really wanted one. So my grandfather called me in the 4th grade. I used to always watch like Where the Red Fern Grows and Lassie and like Old Yeller. I loved being outside in nature, and I just figured a dog was what every kid needed when they did that. And my grandfather called me in the 4th grade, and he said, "Hey, I got you a dog." And this is probably about May. School was getting ready to let out, and I lived in Ohio. So I came down to South Carolina every summer. So I'm super excited. I get down. He got me the meanest little 2-year-old Jack Russell named Snowflake. Okay. So that was my first true dog. And I took that dog everywhere.
Dog with the least aggressive name.
Yeah. And I actually named him as a kid. So I named him a couple years prior. Because a late friend of my granddad, she had a litter of Jack Russell puppies. And she said, "Oh, yeah, the only one that's a boy is the white one with a big spot on his back." So as a 3rd grader or 1st grader at the time, I named him Spot. And I said, "Well, this one I think I named Lily or something." And then the all white one, I said, "Well, it's a girl, so I'll name it Snowflake." It turns out it was a boy, and it ended up being my dog, but I thought it was too late to change the name. But that's how I got into it. I took that dog everywhere. He flew to Oregon with me. He flew to Hawaii with us. He got to sit in all the seats, go everywhere with me. At the time, I remember trying to YouTube how to train an attack dog. And the only video I could find is this guy with a twisted braided rope tugging with his German Shepherd in the backyard. At the time, I thought it was pretty high-speed stuff. Fast forward, I was able to get a big boy dog and got a Corso many years later and started getting into the sport world with that. But that was probably the initial thing that got me into it.
See, you just mentioned my dream dog, the Cane Corso, right? I've been trying to convince my wife for the longest of, we should get a Corso, but she's like, oh, it's too big. Would you please tell her that they're just big teddy bears? It's just more to love.
And I don't want to lie to your wife. They can be. You definitely got to pick the right one.
Well, if I'm ever successful in getting one, then I'll definitely make sure that like I seek the help of both of you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Be happy to help.
All right, man. So for the viewers out there, the basis of what this talk is going to be, a lot, on Doc Wit A Glock podcast, we talk about firearms, we talk about how much, is important to exercise our Second Amendment rights and the right to self-defense and the use of firearms for that purpose. But really, man's best friend can be an undervalued tool in both your home defense strategy and also your personal protection. So I want to lean into that a little bit more with some considerations for the potential pet owners or current pet owners out there that may be interested in using their dog in this way. First off, what's the importance of kind of finding the dog, or how do individuals go about finding the dog that matches their lifestyle? Like, what's the importance in that for owners to have the best outcome, I guess?
You want to take lead or you want me to answer?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking for personal protection specifically, I think the start of finding the right dog, quote unquote, is finding the right trainer. So, and what I mean by that is somebody that understands that, like, hey, we're going to find something that you're going to watch your lifestyle first and see how you live. So, for example, Aaron, like you have a newborn and things of that nature. If you were my potential client, let's just play that role. That would be a lot of the considerations that I would have. If you told me that, like, hey, I live by myself, I have no intentions of having children, we may find a different dog depending on, right? So I think the first step is to look for a reputable trainer that understands what your need is. And then outside of that, one of the things I always ask clients about is, what is it that they're actively wanting to protect? Because there's different dogs or different arsenal for different situations. Point in case, and John can kind of touch on this a little bit more specifically. But, there's difference between I want a dog to protect me versus I want a dog that protects my property. Those are two different breeds that we're probably going to pull from. So those are kind of some of the considerations that I look at as far as what type of dog we're going to even initiate conversation. John, do you have something different that you look into?
So kind of piggybacking off of what you said, lifestyle is a big consideration. You start looking at different breeds. There's really only maybe 4 or 5 that I would consider. And that's your Rottweiler, Cane Corso, German Shepherd, Tibetan Mastiff, and your Belgian Malinois / Dutch Shepherd. Those are about the only 5 I'd really consider because they're going to be the main ones that you can find consistently that can do the job. You've got some outliers in every breed, but as far as numbers and be able to find a likely candidate, those are the breeds that are going to be the most consistent. And you got some outliers like your giant schnauzers, possibly some Dobermans, but harder to find as you start to get into those other breeds. And a big thing that Sean kind of hit on, so many people go buy the dog and then call the trainer and say, hey, I want this to be my personal protection dog. There is a whole evaluation process. There's a lot that we look at, certain lines, the dog's mental state, its drive, that we have to take into consideration. Not any dog can just do this. So a lot of times when I tell people, and unfortunately what I see is a lot of people will call me and say, hey, I have this dog and I got it for personal protection or property protection. And then the dog comes in, I evaluate it, and 9 times out of 10, it's not a good fit for the work.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you're saying is kind of the same issue that I find as a firearm instructor in the civilian space, is that a lot of times people will, they'll have a gun or they'll be passed down a gun, maybe from a family member that is expected to fit roles that it wasn't designed for. Like, someone will go out and purchase a subcompact gun, but want it to do things that, shoot tight 50-yard groups. It's kind of like you need to know the tool and get the right tool for the job. So do you find that amongst the education component of the civilian space, that's a big missing component for you all, that people don't know that you all as trainers can act as the consultant for them in choosing the right animal for their lifestyle?
Definitely. So that is a big part of it, is people just don't understand. They only know what they see on the movies. So they see Lassie, they see John Wick 3. Channing Tatum just did a movie with a Malinois that was tearing his stuff up, and by the end of it, they're best friends, and the dog listens to everything he says. People take that at face value. Like, to them, that's how the process works. They think it's a dog, it has the tools, it should be able to do that. And there's just a general lack of knowledge and understanding, not only of breeds, but how dogs think, how the process works. So it's definitely a huge consideration. They think because I have a German Shepherd, it should be able to do police dog things.
So, in terms of maybe not everyone is of the mindset that, hey, I want the dog who has a large physical size and imposing stature that is going to be beneficial for protection, but I do want a dog that's going to be a companion in the household that will offer some layer of added security. So what about persons that are looking for a dog that maybe is not for the protection so much, but is more so good at detection and alerting, or being an early warning system for the owner?
Yeah, I mean, to be
I'll let you
honest,
get
a
that one
lot
first.
of people that want personal protection dogs, that's where we end up leaning towards the direction that we end up going. It's not so much that they want the actual, the dog to protect them once we go over all the things that encompass. They really want something that's psychologically deterring and then something that is audibly alerting. And for me, like, point in case, my ex-wife, she has her old pit bull. That dog will never bite anybody intentionally. But what she will do is she will offer a security alert that no other system is going to allow. And she has unfortunately, the connotation of being a pit bull associated with her. So a lot of people won't mess with her, so she has all the components for psychological deterrence. And I think that's what a lot of people are kind of after, because especially in America, I mean, we're not talking about somewhere overseas, if you will, like in Australia or somewhere where the average citizen doesn't possess a firearm, right? In America, a lot of people can do the work themselves in a home invasion. They just need something that says, hey, it's here. And when I tell people, I always get the argument, well, I'll just get a security system, which is good, but a security system is the only psychological deterrent that it has is it tells an invader that you've got about roughly, 5 to 10 minutes before the police come, perhaps. And vice, when you hear the growl of a dog or a dog barking, I mean, the only other thing that I think is a little bit scary or a little bit more threatening is the sound of, a shotgun 12 gauge being racked. So, so you have those deterrents at play. But a lot of people are after that, and there's a lot of reliability and stuff and that goes into having an actual dog that will bite. And we can tap into that in a little bit later, but that's kind of my take on it. As far as breeds go, I mean, really anything that looks intimidating. I mean, like John mentioned, the Tibetan Mastiff can do the job. Walking with a giant bear at your side is pretty intimidating.
I mean, I'm not even gonna lie, you hit all the points just there in that statement that I wanted to hit and touch on. One of them being, so, the person who's kind of on the fence, maybe the spouse who's kind of him-hawing about having a dog in the household. Like, what advantage is this dog being in our house going to give us over having a gun or over just having a security system, etc.? So, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head, brother. I appreciate that. I mean, my core story in terms of some of the things that you were mentioning was my wife and I took a trip to Myrtle Beach. And have any of y'all ever had like an alternator go out when you're away from home on a trip?
Yeah.
Well, mine did, right? So we're out there in Myrtle Beach. We're trying to get back, and I'm running purely on battery power, battery drains. And so I had to find my way, get a jump, and find my way to the nearest AutoZone. We're at AutoZone, and we just happen to have the old English bulldog that we had at the time. His name was Samson. And so my wife is outside with the dog near the cars parked in front of the store. And I go inside to see about getting the car inspected. And just as soon as I went inside and I'm at the counter, it was three individuals that just kind of appeared lurking around the car and stuff where my wife was at. And they were getting closer, and one of them peeked around the corner and saw the old English bulldog. And I mean, Samson had a huge freaking head. And I literally think that his presence being there was definite psychological deterrent for those guys. Samson looked like, even though we know he was a kind-hearted dog, he looks like he'll tear your balls up.
Yeah, the story I always share with John is my first military working dog. Her name was Azra, and we were on patrol one night, and it was a very common trend at towards about 1 o'clock in the morning when the bars are starting to let out, and there's only like so many places you could go on the installation at the time, but one of the big places was outside the bowling alley where the bar closed and all that, and they had a big brawl. It was a bunch of infantry Marines fighting with whoever and all this good stuff. And I had just happened to get there first, and I didn't realize it. So I'm standing outside with all these Marines fighting. They're drunk and all that. And I have this 45-pound Malinois. Well, the one thing that we taught her was how to bark on command. And I looked around, I'm like the only MP, and the next guy's not going to be there for another 2 to 3 minutes, which is a very bad situation. But all I did was have her bark on command. She had a really loud bark, and that was enough. I mean, it was like roaches when the lights come on. They scatter. They're like, crap, he's got the dog, or they have the dogs here. And automatically, they came up with their own story and all that. And, it probably saved me from potentially, I mean, I'm sure she would have gotten a few of them, but there's at least 20 Marines fighting. So all that to say, I mean, I think what a lot of people want is that psychological deterrent, and which is easy to find within a breed itself, and just teaching it a few things on being more keen to its environment and understanding what can trigger it to respond in terms of barking, maybe a little bit of snarling and things like that. And that's usually enough to get it done.
It's funny to piggyback off of that, the psychological deterrent. There is something about having a predator on the end of the leash, and when it has the possibility of biting you, we go to a different place as people. There is something in your brain that tells you, I need to get the hell out the way. Even like I think about my first bite in the bite suit. They said, hey, we're going to send the dog on you. Just stand here, arm out. And in my brain, I said, okay, I want to do this. I'm excited. I want to be here. And I put my arm out. I'm standing there in the suit. This giant American bulldog is barreling its way towards me. And I'm like, okay, perfect. Just stand still. And as he launches in the air, he opens his mouth. I see the dog coming. My brain, I'm assuming it's just some built-in hardwire we have as human beings from way back in the day. I snatched my arm out the way. I stepped aside and I moved as fast as I could. I dropped my arm. I got out the way. I said, what am I doing? I meant to take the bite. Something in your brain does not want you to be in front of a predator with teeth that is coming your way. So you will definitely get out of the way. It's a strong built-in psychological deterrent.
It's hilarious. I don't think I could do that, yo. To be in that bite suit, like, what does it feel like? As far as like, are you feeling? I know that suit is heavily padded, but are you feeling like pain when the dog latches on?
A good dog, you're gonna feel some pain. So the suit, all it does is it stops the puncture from coming through. It's supposed to. Some dogs, again, a really strong dog can puncture the suit, but it stops the teeth from coming through. So what you should feel is just a lot of pressure on your bicep or leg or arm where the dog's biting you. It's just an extreme amount of pressure. What really sucks, though, is when they grab the front. Instead of, you'd prefer they bite your entire forearm and kind of grab the whole thing. Sometimes they only grab the front. That's what we call pinching, where they'll pinch it with all that pressure and they actually get a piece of you. That shit hurts. It hurts pretty bad. But other than that, it's just a lot of pressure. You'll be pretty bruised up and sore after you do it. And you got to use your whole body because the dog doesn't just bite and like clamp there. Most of them thrash and push, and like it's a good workout.
Now, do some of these dogs have bite forces that you'd be worried about that even with the suit they could break bone?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people.
Go ahead.
You said
I've seen people that have, depending on the breed, and I think John's going to kind of hit more into it, but the intensity of the dog and how he was trained to bite. And I want to circle back. I'll tie it back all in. But what John was referring to as far as the dog pinching, right? That's one of the reasons why if somebody were to say, hey, I have a German Shepherd and, I want you to train my dog to bite. And part of our evaluation and criteria for that is if a dog does that and it bites very superficial, very, we call it neurotic or nervy, if you will, basically means that it won't commit to a full bite, but it will do just enough to kind of push you away. That's not the dog that you want protecting you. that's an indicator for us that like, hey, this is probably not a good fit. It's not when it comes down, when, rubber meets the road, this dog could get shunned off by if somebody's, let's say they're on drugs and they're not aware of the dog's biting capability. But going back to what you were asking as far as dogs being able to break bone within the suit, yes, if you have a dog that is properly trained and you maximize their bite capability, I forget how many hundreds to thousands of pounds of pressure they can apply, but the exact number, but it can go up into the 1,000 pounds of pressure that can be applied.
Oh my goodness.
Again, that goes with what John was referring to, intensity and states of drive. There's 2 different states of drive that you can tap into. But yeah, there are dogs that can do it. And I mean, I've walked away with plenty of holes after decoying for dogs or working dogs in the suit where they've bitten through the suit and tore skin and all that good stuff. So they're very well capable.
Yeah, y'all got bigger balls. Now, Sean, you touched on some of the characteristics of like, hey, I noticed this is going to be a barrier to training. If you're coaching or counseling kind of a person that wants to get a dog for that purpose of protection, what other characteristics? I don't know. Say I've acquired this dog from a local shelter, or I've gotten this dog from a breeder. What things are kind of red flags to you as a trainer that this is not going to be the dog?
Yeah. So for me, I look at it as the biggest thing would be the nerve of the dog. So basically, essentially, like John and I, point in case, we were just having a conversation about him looking at some puppies, right? We're not looking for the dog that's overly aroused, the one that's barking and moving on its own, the one that's nipping or anything. We're not looking for that. We're more lines looking for a dog that's environmentally sound, meaning it can function through multiple environments and it's okay. That's kind of what I look for, because especially if we're talking about a home environment, yes, biting is good, but it's also one of the easier skills to teach. The harder part is teaching the dog to calm down. Because once we tap into biting and we tell the dog you can express yourself through intensity, through forward aggression, all that good stuff, that's a biological fulfillment for the dog that it's going to actively pursue, right? So it's a lot of dopamine, a lot of good feelings that, it feels good about that. The problem is when we go back and tell it to, hey, this doesn't happen all the time. You need to just chill out, let the kids run around. You don't have to go after them, that type of situation. So for me, we have a very strict criteria from puppies to even, some younger age dogs that we're looking for outside of that. And I guess the more appropriate analogy for this setting would be the equivalent of having a nervy dog that will bite. It's like me presenting you with a weapon that I say, hey, it'll shoot on its own if it feels threatened. It's like, dude, I don't want that type of gun. I'm sorry?
P320?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So we don't want something that will kind of lash out just because, due to poor mechanics or, in a dog, it just feels threatened in and of itself. That'll put you in a lot of legal troubles, or some fines are going to be thrown at you easily. John, what do you look for?
So along the same things, like you touched on, nerve is always the first consideration. The dog of mine just had a litter of puppies about 4 weeks ago now. So in 4 more weeks, I'm actually going to go pick up my next dog. So nerve is the first consideration. And what that kind of looks like, you have dogs, if you ever see like a lot of people, their dogs are afraid of fireworks for coming up on the 4th of July. And you'll hear everybody start saying, hey, I got to lock my dog up, close the doors, don't leave them outside, because they get afraid of the loud noises. You'll see it sometimes with dogs on different surfaces like slick floors or sand, water. Sometimes people can also, like just different environments in general, set off a nervy dog. And what we want to look for is a dog who's very confident no matter what environment they're in. And then the next consideration, at least in a personal protection aspect and really across the board, the next big consideration is prey drive. And then after that, I would say defense is secondary. Prey drive is how a dog reacts to movement, enjoys the chase, hunting. So you look at a dog that likes to play fetch, tug. We kind of run a series of tests based around those games where we like to see a dog tap into that prey drive. And that tells us a lot about where their mind state is at. They're usually a very happy, confident dog when they're in prey. And then the other kind of drive we can work in is defense drive. So that's your dog that's snarling, growling. I got some deep, like guttural sounds coming out, flashing all its teeth in its mouth. And they're saying, hey, don't come any closer. And you would think they're the same thing because both those dogs are probably pretty likely to bite. One dog is biting because it's enjoying the chase and having a good time. The other dog is actually saying, hey, please give me some space, and saying, please back away. For me, I prefer a dog that's a little bit heavier in prey, but I can tap into some defense to bring out a little bit more aggression in certain situations, a little bit more power. But I want a dog who's pretty clear and thinks and works in prey for the most.
Yeah, and you being an owner of a Corso, like, I don't know, man, it's just something intoxicating about kind of that deep bass growl of a Corso. Like, I don't know how anyone could not like a Corso after hearing that.
Depends on what you're doing.
For the same reason. It's a fun dog. Like, actually, I got a picture right here. The first Corso I ever saw, I was 7 years old in this photo. I went to an AKC dog show. This is a 9-month-old Corso. He was like 95 pounds already. And that's what got me into the breed. Really cool dogs, but they're solid. They're a little bit more 50-50, or they can be, in the defense and prey, which does make them a good protection dog candidate. The thing is, you have to find one that has, really, I would say the best ones are about 60 to 70% prey with 30 to 40% defense, because they tend to be a little bit more confident. The issue I see with a lot of Corsos, which is like, if you get one, like, I'm all
scared
for
to
it.
say,
Like, your
don't
wife
talk
should
him out
definitely
of
let
it,
you
dude.
get one, but it's got to come from the right breeder, because you want one that's a little bit, yeah, you want one a little bit more confident. The big problem with a lot of the ones I see that are locally bred or aren't specifically bred for protection work are they're nervy. They breed them a little too defensive, and then they question everything, and they're ready to just pop off the handle. So you want to get a really confident, happy-go-lucky dog who can turn it on when he needs to.
Have you found that a problem, I guess, amongst the local breeding? Like, how often do you find that some of these breeders are just producing dogs ready to crash out?
Like 95% of the time. If they weren't specifically breeding for the work in mind, then usually you don't know what you're going to get. Because a lot of the problem is they look and they're like, oh, these two dogs look good. And a lot of times that's as far as the consideration goes. And when you're talking about these dogs, it's not like we're breeding labs. You know, a lab's going to be happy no matter what happens to it. These dogs that have these natural kind of, we'll call them protective qualities, they're edgy. Like, they're willing to bite. Like, that's kind of the whole reason they were bred. They deal with conflict in pretty common ways, and it usually means putting their teeth on something. So whenever you're dealing with something like that, you want to have a dog that has been specifically selected for certain characteristics and genetics. And I don't know any local breeders in the South Carolina area right now that I would buy a Corso from. I can think of 4 on the West Coast, 1 down in Georgia. You probably New York. And after that, you got me.
Well, given that, like, help us understand, like, you spoke about the importance of the breeder. How far or how long do you think a certain trait has to be trained within a dog's lineage for it to just become like that natural tendency, that natural behavior in that progeny, in that offspring?
So when I pull up like my Corso pedigree or my German Shepherd pedigree, you can go back to like the early 1900s and the pedigree and my German Shepherd, they're all IGP titles, which is a protection sport. And you can see that this dog has been purposely bred for this work. There's not a dog in that pedigree that doesn't have a protection title of some kind. So it goes pretty far back. Corsos are a little different because a lot of times they were used more for personal protection and not as much competition. That's part of the reason why it can be harder to find them in the numbers that you would like as opposed to a German Shepherd or Malinois. The sport kind of keeps the Malinois and the German Shepherd very prevalent and tests them a lot. Whereas Corsos, sometimes Rottweilers, Dobermans, it's more word of mouth, hearing, oh, well, this dog was a good protection dog. It has these qualities, but you don't always know what its parents or grandparents did. So that can be a difference in breeds. It's a little trickier in that aspect. But really, like, there's dogs you go to the shelter and get. There's Corsos from backyard bred litter. You can just go pick one up and you're like, well, I'd say if they had 10 puppies, maybe 2 of them, you pick that dog up and you're like, this is a fantastic dog. The problem is the consistency and the likelihood of getting that, which is where you want to lean on your pedigrees and have more of a lineage of working dogs.
Now, Earlier, you all spoke about you were talking about like a dog being driven by compulsion. Like, help us understand the training methodologies that you guys follow, and like under what circumstances would you use what to get a behavior out of it?
Yeah. So for me, and it kind of ties into the protection aspect as far as I think John mentioned earlier, when you see a certain caliber dog or a certain breed of dog, just the way the dog presents itself can be a little bit intoxicating and can be advertising, right? Some people will walk by and they'll see the dog. Well, the same thing goes in with training. So if I point in case, if you see me with a Malinois or a German Shepherd, and the dog is very well trained, that says something. Like it's already an intimidation factor of itself. It's like, dude, this guy has control over his dog, right? Now, how we gain that control is without going too deep in the science. I guess it's been a while since I've had to kind of keep it surface level. But what we're basically looking at is if I were to train a dog, I try to do it positively at first, meaning your traditional route where the dog does something, it gets a treat, right? It sits, it gets a treat. It lays down and gets a treat, that type of situation. So we make positive associations with the behavior in the beginning. And even how I teach it to bite once we get the dog. John mentioned prey and defense. Prey is basically we target the components of the dog's brain that tells it to go chase a rabbit, right? Or go chase after a bird. That's predatory behavior. There's ways that humans can simulate that with equipment. Defense is kind of the dog is or the wolf is now being chased by something. It's now the prey and it must defend itself, right? And there's ways to kind of tap into that mindset. But if we're talking about obedience, and then it'll flow in together, we start out positive, giving the dog something that it wants. And then once the dog is fluent in all this repetitions and everything else, the dog is fluent. We have verbal communication with the dog. Now we layer in a compulsion based or an aversive, which means the dog must do under any circumstance. And that creates the liability. So point in case, what I tell people is, yes, I can give your dogs all the treats in the world, but the one day it says, no, I'd rather not have the treat. I'd rather go into predatory instinct, right? I'd rather chase after the car. I'd rather chase after the rabbit, whatever it is that, or interact with other dogs. Well, your treat is no longer good. The value is going after that. So now we have to have a way to say, hey, look, dude, I know you want to, but kind of knock it off. Like you have to, right? And no different than the story that you gave earlier about your first, I believe your first, I don't want to mislabel it, but your mats. Yeah. Where somebody
English
called
Samson.
you out and it's like, no, dude, you can't do
Yeah.
that. Right? It's not appropriate. So that's basically what we're conditioning into the dog. Now, just like any other tool, just like guns, can you abuse it? Of course. That's not the argument to be made, right? And that's where we kind of find a lot of discrepancies in training philosophies. Is that some people go overboard and they say you must before they equip the dog with knowing how to avoid it and things like that. But in a nutshell, yeah, compulsion would be at the end of the day, it's going to be despite what you think, this is what's best for you. And that's why we promote responsible ownership, especially when we're talking about personal protection dogs, because it's just as deadly as owning a gun and things like that. Like you have to have sound judgment and know how to utilize that tool if the time comes for it. So, and that's all orchestrated through obedience tasks and things.
I mean, I'm wowed by like all the things that you just said. Like, I really don't think that the average person, the average client that you may call up, like recognizes kind of all the work that you guys do to put into the dog. Like, how long would you say for both of you guys, like your first meeting an animal, how long is that initial assessment to just learn the personality characteristic traits of the dog and assess like which route we need to go in training, which route is going to yield the quickest results?
I'd say now the assessment on a dog is maybe 10 minutes, like if that.
In the beginning, when you were first learning it,
You said in the
how much
beginning,
longer was it?
Yeah, mine's a little bit different because
you thought you needed days or all
Or
this
go ahead,
time
John.
to look at it. I'd say on my end, like getting into protection dogs, we would take a dog for a couple of days. We'd assess it. We'd look at it. We'd sit here and poke and prod. Really, it was just a lack of understanding at the time.
Okay.
Just didn't know what we were looking for.
That's what
I was
were you
saying
adding,
for me,
Sean?
I was a little bit more fortunate because mine was circumvented through the military. So I got to see before I made any assumptions on dogs. I was provided with like a template, if you will, on assessing what characteristics you want, what behaviors would look like, and what the dog was actually telling you vice what you were seeing. So, and dogs are mischievous in that way. We construct all these tests and things that look good, but if you really unveil it, it's not what you're saying. So point in case, and it leads me into one of my pet peeves in personal protection dogs. And I forgot to mention it earlier when we were talking about doing bite work in the suit. If you have a trainer that says, hey, I can do personal protection dogs, but your dog, the only videos and content that they can provide, substance, if you will, is a dog biting what we call a sleeve, which just protects, your left or right arm. That's not the person that you want. They're just teaching your dog to play a game of tug. It's good to initiate bite mechanics, but it's basically telling, that's me trying to sell you a BB gun, telling you it's a 22 or 9 mil. That's not what you're really getting. That's the importance of having the suit on, is that it's the closest thing, one of the closer things that we've invented as humans, where we can put certain pressures on the dog to get it to understand that you must combat and actually go against a human. And somebody of like John's stature that's, 6 foot, that's very meaningful to a dog. That's a lot of mental obstacles that they have to overcome in order to get that type of biological fulfillment of biting. So if John can come over and threaten, and even if me as a guy that's 5'6", I've ran off dogs just through different demeanors that you're going to see from that, from people holding things and all that. But if I have this giant sleeve or this toy, it says ignore whatever the guy has, just go for the toy. Vice a suit has to tap into a deeper part of its brain to fulfill that bite.
So would you say that the suit is pretty much like the equivalent of in the gun space? We use a lot of human silhouette targets for practice when we train civilians. Is that kind of like the dog's way of conditioning it to like, hey, this is the target. This is what I expect you to do. This is how you perform. It's kind of that indoctrination to the dog.
100%, man. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Let's say in the person that's looking to prepare the family pet, let's say they didn't come to you, they didn't get kind of prior education on what is the right dog. They have the family dog that they want to get to exhibit some of these qualities, either being a good alert or a good kind of, I don't know, partial protection dog. What behaviors are critical that you try to instill into the dog?
So I've got an interesting story on this one. I had a client, it was pretty early into me doing the protection dog stuff. They had a Great Pyrenees, which is a really large dog, looks kind of similar to a Tibetan Mastiff if they're white. And they had a problem with people. They owned a convenience store. So people would come up to the convenience store, they'd poke around, they're coming up to the windows. So they said, hey, we want this dog that we already have. He's a year and a half old to protect our property. And I evaluated the dog, and that dog, he couldn't crush a grape in a fruit fight. Like he was a teddy bear, friendliest dog on the planet. What I ended up doing for them was teaching that dog to bark and alert when he saw people. So he would come up to the fence, he would bark, he would jump up on the fence, he'd run the perimeter. All I had conditioned was when I come up, if you run side to side and bark, I'll give you treats. The dog thought people were going to give him food when he saw him. But it was a convenience store in the hood, giant dog running along the fence barking. It deterred people pretty good, and I told him, hey, every once in a while, I'm going to come through, we'll do this, and I'll feed him. That way we keep it going. He's actually still at that same convenience store. I drive by it on my way home pretty frequently. That is, to me, that's about as far as you want to push it with the everyday pet. I've seen people take it further where they take a dog who didn't necessarily have that prey to want to bite, and they push it into defense, which is similar to a fight or flight. And then that dog can become very nervy and unstable at that point. And now you don't have a protection dog. You've got a walking liability because he's on edge all the time. I would rather teach a dog to alert, because even if the dog's happy-go-lucky, most people aren't going to be able to tell the difference, as opposed to push that dog to biting that maybe isn't genetically capable of doing it from a place of confidence.
And really, like, what do you feel is kind of like the light switch, or the switch that turns a dog from I can be loving and docile and calm in the household around family, but I also have that ability to turn it up when need to. So, like, how is it that you go about the process of teaching the dog threat behavior, like identification of threat behavior?
For me, I think it's a good contributor to it is going to be the genetic component. And that's why we were saying originally, you want your trainer to find the dog for you if that's what your intent, because a lot of it we're looking at from, 4 weeks on, the characteristics that we've already kind of alluded to earlier. Outside of that, just in simplistic terms, the way that you present yourself to a dog, you can create associations of threat and let them know that these are the key things to be aware of. Because a lot of things that we could forget as humans is that dogs are very kinetic in how they speak to each other, and that's what they look at in humans. So, like, point in case, if you've had a dog that you've lived with for a long period of time, usually the dog knows when you're going to let it out, when you're going to get ready for work, and it's going to go in its crate if that's what you do, or whatever the case may be, because all they have to do is read on cues. They're essentially inmates, you know. That's all they do is just watch humans and see and study behavior. They're the best behavioralists in the world, but that's all they do is just study what we do. So how we get it to understand, I think I kind of get what you're saying, is how do we get home to at times look like it's peaceful, it's calm, this is family time, and then all of a sudden it shifts gears into, hey, this is a work time. I've seen exercises, been a part of exercises where just even you can train a dog to where, if it hears Brussels in the background, in the yard, approaches to the house at certain times or whatever the case may be, those are those are triggers that maybe something's about to happen. Anywhere from just if everybody's in the house and then something else comes into the environment, then maybe that's your key to alert. With that, like I said earlier, it's easy to teach a dog to tap into all of that good stuff. The thing is having good listening skills to be able to say where you as the owner can say, hey, look, dude, knock it off, or you're good. We can turn the volume down or turn it up based on commands given. So essentially it goes back to the obedience and communication with you. If let's say you're my client, I would tell you, okay, yeah, he's keying up. Now you can give him permission, tell him, yeah, go for it. And the dog would actually activate and so forth and so forth. Or, maybe your friend shows up unannounced, rings the doorbell, knocks on the door. The dog gives you the same warning signals that it's about to aggress. But now you have the option to say, nope, turn the volume down. Hey, relax, plots, lay down, or whatever. Well, I go address what it is, if that kind of answers your question.
And to the dogs having kind of let you run into that have an issue, kind of they're stuck in that on switch, have a difficult time kind of downgrading and switching gears. Do you find that a lot of times when you go into homes and train owners, that the owners kind of temperament, their attitude, their just general nature contributes a lot to that?
Yeah, 100%.
That's a tricky one.
Good.
So pattern, yeah. I was gonna say the same thing. That's a tricky one. It definitely contributes to it. The activity in the house, the level of what you let the dog do doesn't matter. But with that, you can turn it on and off. A lot of that's learned behavior, right? So when you find a dog that's wound up in the house and just constantly going, it's been allowed to do that. It hasn't been shown another avenue. You haven't showed that dog how to calm down. And a lot of people say, I hear it all the time and it blows my mind. Me and Sean talk about it. People live with dogs that are like tearing up their house. They have no control over them. They get into stuff all the time. And we just can't fathom the thought of that, because you have to teach the dogs how to calm down. Some dogs are naturally very relaxed and very chill, but you have to change gears for certain dogs. Sometimes it doesn't click, or they've been taught they can do certain things. I tell a lot of people, I see them bring new puppies home and they're throwing the ball up and down the hallway. They see the puppy and they immediately call its name and get very excited and teach it to jump on them. And because it's small at that time. So you've got a Rottweiler puppy that's jumping up on your legs and you're petting it. Within 10 months, that dog might break 100 pounds. And it hasn't been shown anything different other than I'm allowed to jump on you and run up and down the hall and run around and play frantically. But instead of being 15 pounds, now we're dealing with 115 pounds. So you have to teach these dogs how to calm down. Your Tibetan Mastiffs and certain breeds are naturally going to be a little bit more chill. Your Rottweilers, your Corsos, as opposed to like a Malinois that's just going to want to go all day. I start every puppy with a place command where I can tell them to go somewhere, lay down and settle. And I tell everybody my house is the most boring place on the planet for a dog. Nothing fun happens in here. Have zero expectations of doing anything fun.
Teaching a dog, how do you get the dog to, like, this dog's going to go with us through our everyday life, not only just be in the home. And our lives are noisy, right? The dog's going to encounter multiple stimuli throughout the course of its day, going about living life with the owner. How are you, the trainer, working with these dogs and the owners to help the dog prioritize, hey, I want you to prioritize threat behavior and ignore kind of other things that are happening on in the background around it?
Yeah, that can be tricky at certain points, depending on everything is dog dependent, right? If we can understand that, then past that, there's just I would say basically consistency is going to be your biggest friend, right? So for you, you have a child and things like that, a newborn that's going to actively cry and things like that. And there's going to be a lot of changes with that child. What I would condition it is maybe something along the lines of what John was saying, like place training. Like you hear this baby crying, that's not for you. That's not your concern. That's for the parents to address. The adults will deal with that matter. Your job is to kind of chill out during that situation. As the child develops, starts moving around and things like that, that's where our tools kind of bridge that gap. And consistency along with appropriate use of the tools. So if we're talking electronic collar or e-collar and all that good stuff, that serves as a communication signal. Like even in high states of arousal where the dog's maybe intrigued by the baby running across the room because it's never seen it do that before, I can verbally tell the dog as a warning shot, like, hey, dude, relax, lay down, and then followed by an action that would suggest that the dog should follow the command given. And so basically whatever we put action to, that's what the dog is going to perceive as, the behavior that's appropriate for that situation. So it's contingent off of training and understanding where to put our actions behind and where not to. That kind of answers. John, what do you have? Because I'm kind of interested on your take.
So I'll give you firsthand experience how I did it when I brought my son home. I had a German Shepherd and Tibetan Mastiff living in the home at the time. And it's honestly exactly what Sean just said. When the baby would cry, I conditioned go to place. You don't go investigate the crib. It's not your job to go to this baby. I'm very particular about kids and dogs until the kid is old enough to understand how to give the dog the boundary and space it's supposed to. I actually teach my dogs to kind of avoid and give them a little distance, and you go into drive under no circumstances around this child. So everything was kind of, hey, you see the baby crying, whining, crawling, give it space and just be patient. So we conditioned a lot of that. Once my kids were crawling is when it got interesting. It kind of freaked my dogs out to begin with because now this thing could move. But again, just conditioning, hey, the baby's going to crawl. What you do is you get up and get out the way. Right? There's no conflict. There's no confrontation there. So it's having the obedience there to condition the behaviors to certain actions, like Sean was saying. So it could be crying. It could be crawling towards you. If I consistently tell my dog, hey, when the baby crawls towards you, get up and walk out the way. Go to place, move. Eventually the dog says, baby's coming, I leave. And once my son was old enough, for my son, it was about around 3 years old, 2 years old, I could tell him, hey, remember, we don't mess with the dog when he's sleeping because you have to give them grace like they're animals. If I was asleep and I felt somebody snatch my ball sack, like I'd wake up ready to bite too. So you got to give them some kind of grace. But once my son was old enough to understand, like, hey, when he's sleeping, we don't mess with him or we call his name or make a sound to wake him up. That way he knows you're there, right? Or like, hey, we pet him in the head or we don't pull his ears. And again, you find dogs that are tolerant enough that they're not going to react right away. But you also have to have that conversation with your kids where you say, hey, these are the rules with it.
With these working dogs, being exposed to like stress of everyday life, all the stimuli that we just mentioned before, like what are some of the telltale signs that you think owners should be aware of? Hey, my dog is overly stimulated. Hey, he needs a break. He needs to be out of this environment before bad things happen.
Yeah. I think for me, it's more along the lines of when you don't have good communication with your dog in that situation, then it's becoming too much. Especially, I mean, it depends on what stage of training we're in and all that, all those considerations and things like that. But in any given general situation, if I cannot control my dog and I can't, and it's no longer listening or wanting to interact with me or whatever, and I lose listening skills, then it's probably been too much. And that can, I mean, I've seen it happen. We just did an episode on it, our last episode of when training becomes too much. But I mean, it could be in a low stimulus environment where the dog is expected to work and all that good stuff. And then all of a sudden it becomes flat or it just says, I don't want to do this anymore. And they're no different than people. We come out with all these strong, hardcore intentions that the dog is oblivious to in the beginning. And, we want to get to a certain point in training that the dog that's not a part of their agenda. And we get frustrated with the dog once he gets, it's kind of done with training. So there's ways where the dog will say, hey, I want to be done, and that's kind of my telltale sign. And they're no different than people in the fact that, eventually they don't want to constantly be stimulated. There are plenty of dogs that will just sleep and relax. And those are the same dogs that if you look at them wrong, they'll kill you as well. But they don't want to constantly live in that same state of arousal. So we kind of want to have some type of, for lack of better terms, stasis or balance, always training or actively training rather. And just, okay, we're just here to be, you be a dog, I'm going to be the human, just go walk and do your thing. And if an opportunity were to present itself, then you react to that opportunity. But outside of that, you're of no, you're not being compelled to do much.
Anything to add, Jonathan?
No, Sean hit the nail on the head. We tell people all the time the best thing your dog can usually do in most situations is nothing, unless you've been trained to respond to certain stimulus or given a key word to turn you on or put you into drive. If my dog's doing nothing, then he's not creating problems, which is 99% of the battle.
I think Sean mentioned at one of the episodes of your podcast the term of like jackpotting a behavior. So can you explain that and kind of how that might be a useful tool in training a protection dog? Like how would you utilize that?
Yeah, in terms of if we're talking about biting and things like that, what I would do for most protection dogs, generally speaking, is that once it's proficient at, let's say, sit down and I can tell it to walk with me. Those three behaviors, right? And they're pretty reliable, picture perfect world. I will use those behaviors now to teach it to, well, let's say what we're doing, the dog's expectation is for food, right? We're just doing, okay, you can sit down and all that stuff for food. Well, let's say I get a full sequence of stuff that I like, whatever Rubik's Cube of behaviors, however I want to mix it up. And then I'll say, hey, activate. And now appears my decoy or the guy that I want him to go bite. That would be kind of a way of jackpotting. Yes, it will accept the food in certain contexts, and that is good. But what it really wants to do is it wants to go bite, right? So we will say, hey, we liked everything that you just did. We're going to give you the biggest reward. You won all the money that's, in the machine, if you will, right? And that's kind of an easy way to interpret jackpotting. I think John may have a different analogy. He has pretty good ones.
So that's, as far as keeping it simple, I think that's the best way to understand it. It's just a big prize at the end. So you can give a dog one treat over and over. And then if the dog does something I really like, maybe I give him 10 or 15. So now you say, hey, there's something to this. There's something more I'm working for. So it's like getting tips throughout the week if you're a server, and then you get a check that maybe is your big check at the end of 2 weeks, right? Like you get the big reward for all your hard work.
I think in one of your episodes, and I really liked how you all put it, you equated it to basically I'm like my dog's drug dealer, right? I'm just feeding the feed more and more until like one day it's like, shoot, I get all the crack? You mean if I do this, I get all the crack?
Yeah.
That's cool, man. All right, so I'm gonna switch gears in terms of kind of what we've been discussing and go into more of just something comical. Now, from your civilian side, the pet side, have you ever been like contacted by a client that secretively has been wanting to turn family dog into a drug dog because they think their team is smoking dope?
Man, clients will call and do some crazy stuff with their dogs. I've had I need a drug dog. I need my, like, they'll ask me to do some crazy stuff. And sometimes it's fun to take it on just to see if you can do it. But, oh man, like the one that probably happens the most is people will call and say, hey, I need a service dog, but I also need to do bite work and I need to not let anybody near me, but also go in public everywhere and do everything a service dog does.
Yeah.
And by the way, I have no medical condition. That's not a thing. Like, you can't.
They want you to
They
produce a
do really
uniform.
cool stuff on TV. Yeah, like they want this dog that has the job of 5 different dogs. But even in John Wick 3, they've got all those Malinois. I think Halle Berry has 2 Malinois that like do everything. They attack the guys and move with her. That's 5 different dogs.
Yeah.
Like behind the scenes, it's actually 5 different Malinois that they
Oh, wow.
use each one for a specific scene and specific task. Like they can't do everything. They can do some things really well, but people's expectations of what they can do is just, it's out there.
That's actually, that would be a cool spin for your own podcast, man, if you did a dive into movie pop culture and dispel kind of or debunk some of these myths about dogs that people have from just watching movies. Like, that'd probably be a dope angle.
Do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that would draw some attention because even like I was sitting in the kitchen today. My wife had cooked dinner and my dad came over. We had family dinner together, and like he wanted to know because he watches so many films where there's a guard dog, and it always seems to be like a
Yeah.
car auto yard or something, and the bad guy tosses the dog a steak with a tranquilizer in it and the dog goes to sleep. Like, how like practical is that? I'm asking this for my dad. How practical is that a trained, dedicated protection working dog could be fooled by something like that? That their training would be overridden by a snack given to them.
I would say it's pretty practical. I mean, it's worth a try. I'll tell you that. And that just goes down to, it just draws back to training. I mean, basically, I mean, it's just in comparison to shooting. I mean, it's as much as you train for, right? So, and that's where I think, especially for me, like dealing with a lot of law enforcement and things like that and other actual working dog, or not actual, but like working dog capacities, integrating with the sports side of things where they train for a lot of what we would conceive as unimaginable situations where, yeah, we're going to do what we call food refusal, where we teach the dog to ignore things that the decoy or the suspect or whatever is going to provide to you. No, you ignore that. That's not for you in this state of drive. Your only job is when I tell you to go bite, that is your job. When I tell you to go search for these target odors or substances, that is your job. And so the burden becomes on the trainer to expose the dog to those scenarios. And it's limitless. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I've come up with in mentors and peers has been through like failed deployments or things that we've seen go wrong. And we're like, dude, how could we mitigate that in training? So yeah, I mean, I would venture to say to the average trainer that just wants to hit the wickets on, make your dog look decent and say, yeah, it just bites and that's great. Then yeah, you could probably give him a hamburger and tiptoe past him as long as it takes him to consume it. And then after that, he may go back in the bucket. But,
So you better move quick.
That's my take on it. It's just, you have to train to it, right?
All right. Well, man, I know we're getting on in time, but the last thing I'm going to kind of close out with is just talk about some life stuff, man, like fatherhood in general sense. I'm a new father. What I guess a lot of my listeners don't know about my life is that 3 years ago, my wife and I we had tried to have a child, and we did have a child, but ended up 3 years ago having a miscarriage. I mean, it was a boy, and it was pretty devastating. When we got this new child, a baby girl that was born in March, it was kind of like, for me personally, I don't know, like God's way of saying that everything's going to be okay. This kid came from me during a time when a lot of crap was going up in the air, man, in life. Like, in general, I was going through a transition at job, a long-term job that I was at, and got the announcement I was expecting baby girl to come in April, and boom, I was like, no, she's coming in March. So it's like, hurry up and get ready. And the sense of, just these going on 4 months of fatherhood has just been a roller coaster. For me, it's been a lot of days where it's like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. How was it for you, John? Sean, are you also?
Yes, sir. One and done.
Yeah. So, like, kind of, how was the experience for you? Kind of, first having your kid join your world, and then also, like, what advice do you have for, other first-time fathers, and include myself?
Yeah.
So I was kind of in the same boat with you.
Oh, no, I was saying I'll go ahead and speak on mine because I know John has I mean, not to tell his story, but his story is one hell of a one. I hope he's in a capacity to share it with his two children. For me, to answer the first part, one, congratulations, brother. Like, I know the circumstances never truly line up. Funny thing, John and I were just talking about last week about rushing things and all that. And I think that's kind of the universe or God's way, whatever you believe in, but that's its way of getting us more in tune with what's actually important. Because the more time we spend trying to prep and make sure every finite detail is pitch perfect, it's just deviating from those moments that you need. You kind of, especially as men, you kind of need that stress behind you to kind of get things going. So, coals make diamonds, you have to apply that pressure sometimes. So that's how I look at things going forward is everything happens for a reason. Our job is to find the reason. Secondly, when it comes to being a parent, I think being aware that you're never going to do anything perfect. Like one of the things I can look at how my dad raised me and say, hey, it was crappy. I didn't appreciate X, Y, and Z. I'm tackling mental health, all this stuff. And it's like, dude, he was just doing the best he could, you know, at that point in time. And later on, I have to understand that my son's going to bitch, moan, and complain about something that I did. I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? And I can't hold him to that, for something that he's never experienced. So just knowing, be present. That's all I can say is the biggest thing for me, especially I'm not sure your occupation and everything, but it sounds like you're kind of in our line of work where you're constantly doing something. I mean, hell, to even have a podcast and, devote time into that, is taking away and understanding how to balance that. But yeah, all that to say for me, man, is I take it one step at a time and just have a good circle to pull from too. This podcast, whatever, if you're ever having problems, you have my number, dude, man, man to man, just speak up. There's times where I'll call Sean and be like, dude, is this something you think you would do? Or is this seem right? Or is this too early? And we'll joke about it. We'll get through it. We'll assess it or whatever the case may be, but you have to have a strong circle. The last thing I will say, and this was probably the hardest lesson that I had to learn, and I'm still learning the process. Dude, when they say it takes a village to raise a child, that is the one thing I don't think we give women credit enough is their intuitiveness, if that's a word, to understand and be able to compromise and say, hey, look, I need help from external entities, whether that's immediate family or mom, dad, brother, sister, financially, whatever it is. I'm hearing stories from my dad and I thought he had it all together. And he's like, no, dude, I borrowed money from your brother, your uncles, your sisters. We were down bad. I could barely pay the light bill at one point. We weren't privy to it, but he had sense enough to draw from, from whatever resources he had to at the time, not to become dependent on it, but to know that it's there for you. You don't have to, as cliche as it sounds, you don't have to do it alone. And that's probably my biggest.
100% great, man. Uh, like my wife's parents and my dad. My dad was here today. Her parents were here all of last week. Last week was my wife's first week returning back to work off of maternity leave, and like honestly, the whole process of the past 2-3 weeks would have been a whole lot more difficult without them. So I'm definitely thankful to them and thankful to my wife. That's how I got to shoot tonight's podcast, because she's taking care of my daughter tonight. So big ups to Brandis. Jonathan, man, what words of wisdom do you have?
So kind of similar to your situation, the kid coming early and just at an unexpected time. Me and Sean talk about it all the time. We always say like, oh, we have an emergency or something came up. At this point, emergencies shouldn't even be surprising. They're part of life. Things are going to pop up. They're going to come. With parenthood, you've got to be very flexible. Things are going to change. You're going to be in a rush to go somewhere. The baby's going to have a blowout, doctor's appointments, getting sick. And as they get older, they get into things. You have to learn to be very flexible. You have to learn when to be stern and when to teach and be fair. I think that's one of the biggest things is I want to teach my son a lot of stuff. So I try and really focus on, okay, how does he feel about this? What is he learning? What's he taking away? So setting up different scenarios or different things where I give him the opportunity to choose and try and teach him right from wrong in a lot of scenarios. My daughter, I just spoil the shit out of her. She gets away with murder. Daughters are tricky. I have to be firmer with her because she's the one I should be worried about. She can get over on me a lot easier. But I would say flexibility, man. Being flexible, like Sean said, having that village behind you, because it does take a lot. You need help. And then having a group of men you can rely on, where you can reach out. And sometimes you just need to know that other people are going through the same thing and that you're not alone. And that'll kind of give you the energy you need to push through. One piece of advice I would give you is, as you're doing this, you're going to find your own way. You're going to ask other people and kind of take some advice away about different things. Take it all in, figure out what works for you. But for your own mental health, try and maintain some kind of hobby that you keep for yourself. Do it as frequently as you can, if that's once a month, once a week, whatever. But don't not take care of yourself. That's one thing that I neglected for a while, because as a man, a lot of times you carry a lot of the burdens from outside the house. What I tell my wife is everything in the house she deals with the stress in the home, and my job is to protect the outside world from bringing stress in. So a lot of times we kind of shoulder that burden. And it could be a lot. So find some kind of activity, some kind of hobby where you can get out. For me, I prefer something physical, playing basketball, working the dogs, where I can get out, get moving, and preferably something in a group, because taking care of yourself is a big part of that.
Thanks, man. I mean, I really appreciate those words. The last part of what you said kind of really resonated with me as far as, taking care of yourself. Sean, like, really what my main thing is that I do is I'm a foot doctor. I've been in kind of the private space of healthcare for the past 8 years. And really, I got into what I do on the side, firearm training, as an outlet, because being in healthcare, it can be hella stressful at times. And so, like, on my website, one of my slogan that I have is knowledge breeds confidence, and confidence is power. So that's one of the biggest things that I try to instill in students that sign up with me. And what makes me the happiest is when I have a student who walks in and they're not confident in their abilities to be their own personal protector, to solve their own problems involving their personal safety, and seeing them walk away with that confidence, like, that's what does it for me. So that I guess that's my hobby, aside with shooting, is helping to teach people the same way you guys do. And I think kind of the biggest thing right now that I'm seeing in my life in this season with my daughter is that I think the message that God has been trying to send me is slow the hell down. Like, life is, as you're chasing these achievements and these goals and checking these things off the box, like, in the grand scheme of things, like, none of that shit matters. Like, the things that matter are kind of, your family, your friends, and your relationship with God. So that's kind of the season that I see myself going through right now, is the transition of.
Good, man.
Well, man, we've been out here having a good time. We have talked. Literally, I'm outside recording in my backyard, and we have talked until it got dark out here. So I want to start closing out by, one, having you all tell if you got any social media, you're training, currently accepting clients, how can people get in touch with you? How can they see your Instagram, your YouTube, your Facebook for your professional services? And how can they check out your podcast, of course?
I think there is a quick lag, but for me, I'm on Sean White on everything. So SeanWhite, letter K number 9. You can find me on Instagram that way. YouTube, and for Facebook is DESEAN White. And then for the podcast that John and I do, it's Working Dogs and Whiskey. If you search it on any platform, Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, and then Instagram is the same handle, Working Dogs and Whiskey, just as it's spelled, all letters. You can find us there. And John, how do they find you individually?
So Jonathan Moses, letter K number 9 on everything. And you'll find all my individual stuff. And like Sean said, Working Dogs and Whiskey on every platform, Instagram, YouTube. And you can reach out to us. You want to talk to both of us, and you just reach out to Working Dog and Whiskey. If you're in Texas and need some training for pet dogs, working dogs, hit up Sean. In the East Coast, South Carolina area, then reach out to me.
Well, guys, I really appreciate your time, talking with Doc Wit A Glock podcast tonight. I know this is going to be an episode that many people Really would probably will tune into and listen to. Guys, if you're out there and you're looking for great podcast content, check out these guys' podcasts. I promise you won't be disappointed. As always, guys, this has been Doc With A Glock. Peace, love, and hair grease. We're out.